Thank you very much for the invitation, Sandy. And I have to say, were it not for your charm and grace and beauty, I would never have accepted to do anything like a combination of mercy and sacrifice on the one evening, let alone Bridget. So what I'm going to hope to present to you is something, a very abridged version of what I've been trying to work on for many, many years. And I'm looking forward to relating all of this to Bridget in the second part of my presentation. I've been involved in the question of sacrifice for many, many years. Primarily, I think it started when we were in the middle of the chaos here in Ireland for 30, 35 years in Northern Ireland and in the rest of the country, where sacrificial discourse was running riot and legitimating all sorts of horrific atrocities. And in the middle of which the Vatican decided that women could not be ordained, that we were constitutionally and ontologically and philosophically and biologically incapable of ordination. And there seemed to me to be a connection between those two things, the way in which sacrifice legitimated some horrors and the way in which it served as a major field of gender discrimination. And so in the first part of this evening, I'm going to look at sacrifice. And then I understand that you will have some time to discuss that and come back with questions. And then in the second part, then I'm hoping to look at mercy and to relate it to my understanding of Bridget, and which I've also been working on for many, many years. And yes, some years ago, I was asked to write a book and I thought, yeah, I'd do it in 3 months because I thought I knew something about her. And this is at least 8 or 10 years later, and the publishers have not got on my back as yet, but I think they don't want to see me anymore. I'm not really sure. I don't care. It'll happen when it happens. Okay, so the sacrifice is one of those weasel words that means absolutely everything and means absolutely nothing. In indigenous societies, sacrifice was, although the word is used, it's really an act of gratitude. It's an act of gratitude for the harvest, where people poured a little piece of wine or maybe some fruits or something into the earth, just as is to say, thank you. Thank you for being with us again for another year. But in societies of empire, sacrifice means something very, very different. And I've started to use the word religions of empire very often recently, and it's beginning to catch on, which I think it ought to, because I think we do need to distinguish between religions of empire and indigenous religions, which we are hoping to recuperate through our work on Bridget and the Cailleach. Sacrificial rituals, discourses, and ideologies run riot, and I'm speaking today mostly about the discourse, not about the actual practices. Yet from the beginning of the Jewish and Christian traditions, the women objected. When Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac, when Sarah heard what he had gone to do or attempted to do, she fell dead with the fright and the horror. And similarly, in the Irish Celtic tradition, when the Virgin Mary, heard what they were proposing to do with Jesus, they said, said to God the Father, would you ever not save the world in some other way, but please don't let my son be killed. And so, there has been from the very beginning a gender splitting in the relations of sacrifice. And power, relies on forces of misrecognition, and sacrifice is one of those arenas where misrecognition runs riot. Now, I'm not going to burden you with definitions of sacrifice because there aren't any. The first definition is said to have been from Augustine. And basically, Augustine said sacrifice is a holy act, and a holy act is whatever the holy men say it is. That's a kind of a circular reasoning that you'll recognize. If you want to read further about that kind of stuff, they're all on I have several articles on my academia page, which you can relate. Priests, politicians, and human bombers use the word sacrifice as though it had an agreed meaning, and of course it doesn't. And of course, women self-sacrifice. That's the one that we're allowed to do. Soldiers use the word liberally. They sacrifice their lives without ever mentioning how many other lives they have taken in the process or how many other people have been killed. Legitimate political sacrifice plays a major role in the construction of the imagined nation, whether that be of an empire or an anti-colonial struggle. But there's also illegitimate sacrifice, and that takes the form of so-called terrorism. martyrdom, suicide, human bombers. So in other words, legitimate sacrifice is only whatever the holy men or the men in power say it is. We also have interrupted, irrelevant, revived, failed, or non-recognized sacrifice, or even incomplete ones. Incomplete. A failed or revived one would be like when Frank Stagg, the hunger striker, came back to Ireland at one point. He was dead. He had died in hunger strike, and the Irish government decided to meet him at the airport, take him to the grave with trucks of concrete and concrete his body into the ground, making sure that he would never be a focus for a revival of sacrificial discourse in Ireland. So there are many, many types of sacrifice. But basically, tonight I'm going to talk about three parts of it, which are interrelated. Or I'm going to talk about not what it is, but what it does. And that's, and again, you can't talk unilaterally about what something does, because there are different aspects in different places. But the first one is indebtedness and guilt. In religion, we are deeply indebted to a founding figure, a son, a grandson, or other innocent male figure who died violently. The sacrifice of women, like Iphigenia in the Eumenides, or in, it's not in the Eumenides, and wherever it is, can't remember, did not found a state or was otherwise not representational. So indebtedness to a savior figure appears at the outset, and this debt is the currency of theological exchange, which is a precursor to the exchange economy of capitalism itself. In Christianity, we talk about Jesus. In Islam, we talk about Hussein. And in Judaism, we talk about Isaac, although that was an interrupted sacrifice. The debt and the guilt can never be erased. It's passed on from generation to generation. Similarly, in politics, we are indebted to all those who gave their lives, but they had to die violently in order to be recognized as sacrificers. Women who give their lives to raising and to nurturing, again, are not recognized as sacrificers. As again, self-sacrifice doesn't really count. Ancestor cults are used to commemorate and celebrate those debts and to serve to construct and consolidate political relationships. We know that on the anniversary of World Tone, we have many, many different political regimes marching to his grave as though to claim him for their own political agendas. So ancestor cults are designed primarily to coordinate relationships among the living rather than the dead. So we need to recognize them for what they are. Birthing discourse runs all the way through sacrifice, also in the political realm. A. Houseman, when he was in the First World War, wrote, "For the calling bugle hollows, high the screaming fife replies, gay the files of scarlet follow, woman bore me, I shall rise." Sacrificing soldiers give birth to a sacred legacy, a new political dynasty erected on the violent death of the martyr or the life-giving of the soldier, rather than the life-giving energies of women. Even in The Birth of the Nation, Murphy wrote, "It is wonderful, amazing, marvelous beyond conception, this new birth of a great nation. The whole British race entering into a life and death struggle with the greatest military tyranny that ever appeared on the planet, serenely joyous, conscious of great peace at heart, justice, freedom, love, faithfulness to obligations, defense of the weak, were the ideals that inspired the British people to take up arms and enter into the Great War." Now, we all know, as Freud wrote, that, war is a compass card of motives, some glorious, some vain, and some disastrous. But that never enters into our discourse on sacrifice today. And the awful tragedy of this is that when soldiers are dying in their battlefield, the last thing the chaplains often write about, they say their last words are they're crying for their mothers. And so there's something very, very strange about that relationship, how the maternal discourse enters into sacrifice at the very last minute. And this was also true of Gallipoli. In Turkey, there is a present-day quotation from Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the first leader of the Republic of Turkey, and it reads, "Those heroes who shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now lying in the soil of a friendly country, therefore rest in peace. There's no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmets to us where they lie side by side in this country of ours. In other words, they're lying. He goes on to say, you the mothers who sent their sons away from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are at peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well. And this is one of the many, many implications that sacrifice is genealogical, and genealogical by which I mean relations of power, but also genealogical in the sense of lineage. The second major issue in relation to sacrifice, and there are many others that I won't be able to cover this evening, are gender relations. And Nancy Jay, a very fine theorist, anthropologist, wrote about sacrifice in this way. She said, the only action that's as serious as giving birth, which can act as a counterbalance to it, is killing. This is one way to interpret the common sacrificial metaphors of birth and rebirth, or birth done better, on purpose, on a higher, more spiritual, more exalted level than mothers do it. And this is one of the huge reasons why women cannot be admitted to the sacrificial realms. Not that we especially want to do it anymore, but to preserve the purity of the sacrifices was also to preserve the purity of the exclusive group holding political and economic power. Man born of woman may be destined to die, but man integrated into an eternal social order, to that degree transcends mortality. And so sacrifice gives birth not just to ordinary mewling, crying babies, but to an eternal order of being, which transcends the biological necessities to which most of us are subject. So what is women's place in the sacrificial social order, and how can this be challenged, as I'll take up in the second part of this evening? They largely agree that women or children cannot be celebrants. Thomas Aquinas even addressed the issue, and he was one of the most honest people to do so, because he went through all the reasons as to why women could not be, why traditionally women could not be priests. And the final one he came up with was this one. He said, women, like slaves, cannot signify eminence. Now, I think that's hilarious. Women cannot signify eminence like slaves, and therefore we cannot be priests. So therefore, it logically follows that the rites of sacrifice, particularly in that tradition, are performative, and they're performing an act of what we call male hegemony. In other words, any man who is in any way bereft of the correct appendages or the correct biological accoutrements can't be a priest either. So it's a performance. It's a performance of male dominance. Women are scapegoats of the sacrificial social order, but they can sacrifice themselves, but that has no repercussions in the symbolic realm. So sacrifice could be therefore said to be a form of cultural labor that facilitates splitting, which is also a form of mystification. And it's the appropriation of birth. And if ever there was any doubt that this was the case, I found a little paragraph in the Irish tract of the Mass in Thesaurus Talia Hibernicus. And it goes like this. They're wondering how the communion host is to be shared in the Mass. And at those days, they would have had fairly big communion hosts. So they say this, well, the first part has to be given to the bishops in the right-hand corner. The left part can be given to the priests. The third part can be given to the lay persons or the communicants or those who are wanting to be baptized. But in the middle, this is the most important part. The middle particle is that to which the Mass priest goes, the figure of the breast with the secrets. Now, anybody familiar with the work of Melanie Klein will understand the significance of the breast in that kind of discourse. So what I'm saying there is that when we call for, the distinction between sacrifice and mercy, it represents a major challenge to the dominant major religions of empire, because most of them are founded on sacrifice. But were I to go on, which I'm not going to do this evening, to relate this to the economic realm, all of those issues are also there. The whole question of guilt and indebtedness and the currency of death and guilt, that is also drives the capitalist so-called rational order. I'll just make one response to Emer, because ironically, part of what I was presenting this evening was half of what I presented a couple of months ago to a group called the Gift Economy, run by people like Genevieve Vaughan and Vandana Shiva and others, who are trying to recuperate the notion of the gift as in direct opposition to capitalist, patriarchal, or neoliberal economics. So I think, I wouldn't be anxious to recuperate the word sacrifice, but I would certainly be anxious to recuperate the word gift and also the word choice. But anyway, that's another, it's a very, very detailed discussion. And like I said, anybody in their right mind would never have taken on doing sacrifice and mercy in the same evening. But Sandy persuaded me. He's one of those people, what can we say? So yes, we'll move on to mercy, which is much more maybe life-giving to all of us. So I'll start my PowerPoint. Oh my gosh, it actually works brilliantly. Yes, okay. So I'm going to start with that beautiful image of a bird looking
Sorry,
at...
Mary, we can't actually see anything. You need to press the screen share.
Sorry, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Joni. Sorry, I always forget these things, and thank you for reminding me. Did I do that time? Did I do it right? Okay, do it again, Mary. What? Screen share. Go back in there. Go back in there and do screen share. Okay. Now can you see?
It's just starting out. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, well, the first image I want to show that...
Just go down to open up the presentation now.
I have opened it up, actually.
Yeah, just go down to that little button there. On
Which
the
oh,
bottom.
that one.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Okay, I want to start with this image of a little bird minding her chicks in the nest, which I think is the essence of mercy. And I'll go on then to the next image, because I know that the question of sacrifice can be very depressing. So there's a beautiful quotation from a rabbi. One day when Rabbi Yohanan Zakkai came out from Jerusalem and Joshua, walking behind him, saw that the temple had been destroyed, the disciple exclaimed, "Woe to us that this has been destroyed, the place where they atoned for the sins of Israel." Yohanan said to him, "My son, grieve not. We have a means of atonement that is like it, as it says in Hosea, for I desire mercy and not sacrifice." So the question is, what exactly is mercy, and how can we begin to reclaim it? The next image is another image of the swan gathering her chicks under her wings. And this has, again, great attunement with the words of none other than Jesus. When Jesus was in the Gospel of Luke, looked over Jerusalem and he said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often have I longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." And so Jesus had that image of divinity as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Now, where do we find a similar image and a similar resonance? Now, there's the Cailleach. The Cailleach was the ancient ancestress of Ireland, about whom we don't hear a great deal these days, because the witch, she might be seen as a witch because she's related to Samhain, and as we know, the witches have been demonized and put out of culture in any particular way. But in my work on Bridget, I found that if you started with the lives of Bridget, that'd be one thing. If you started with the Bridget and the Tuatha Danann, that'd be another thing. If you started with the rituals, that'd be another thing. But if you started with the material artifacts, that was another thing altogether. And so I would start with the cloak. And the Cailleach shaped the landscape with her cloak. As she went all over the country, dropping her stones out of her cloak or out of her apron or out of her basket. And I was stunned to hear that this motif is one that is all around the world with different figures of divinity, not only in Europe, but in Asia, in North America. The world is created through the cloak of the Cailleach or a Cailleach figure. And of course, this relates to Bridget, because the story we hear about Bridget is that she asked a rich man for land, and the rich man says, yeah, put out your old cloak there and cover the land. And as much as the land will cover, that's the land you can have for your monastery. Now, that is a very domesticated version of the story of female creation and female creativity, because the reality is that the cloak represents the womb. It represents the womb that we all have come from, the great womb of the female images of divinity in whatever culture we are immersed. So we'll move on a little bit and we come to the image of Sarasvati. Now, what's Sarasvati doing? She is gathering up the dew. In some images, she's sitting on a lotus, which is the same color as the dew, because in indigenous religions or in female-centered centers of divinity, the dew is the sacred fluid. And as you know, we put out the cloak of Bridget at Imbolc. It was also actually put out at Bealtaine and Lunasa and Samhain, but we've been confined to Imbolc at the moment. But that image of putting out the cloak in so many religions is also a universal language. I mean, Adrienne Rich talked about, she had the dream of a common language. Now, with the work we can do on female images of divinity and traditions of divinity, we have the makings of a common language. And here's another image. This one is of Kuan Yin, and she has gathered the dew, and now she's pouring it out over her petitioners. And that is a very common image of Kuan Yin that is shown all around the world. So where does that leave us? Here we have the image of the Virgin Mary, and you can see her cloak. Her cloak embraces everybody of all colors, creeds, denominations, sexualities, in-laws, the outlaws. The cloak covers everyone. And the crucifix has been superimposed in there somewhere, but it's very much subservient in that image, as it is in most images of Mary, to the cloak, which, again, needs to be brought into our consciousness as an image of mercy, because the cloak is mercy. It means there's nobody excluded. We are not the people who sacrifice, who say, you're gay or you're lesbian, you're transsexual, you're transgender, you're whatever. Everybody is welcome because we are all under the cloak of mercy. And I have many, many images of Mary and the cloak, but Sandy only allowed me to use 7, or I think it was 5, but now I have 9. I just sneaked in a couple more, Sandy, sorry about that. That's another beautiful image where everybody is gathered under Mary's cloak. So that's just briefly a couple of images that I wanted to show you as to what the essence of mercy is. And again, on my academia page, I have a number of essays on mercy, which you're all welcome to look at. One of them is called, oh gosh, it comes from William Butler Yeats, "Too long a sacrifice makes a stone of the heart." Oh yeah, "Melting Hearts of Stone." That's the name of the article that's on my academia page, explaining exactly what mercy might be. And so what are the practices of mercy? One of them would be to say, what's the currency of power? Because mercy is the province of the prophets. Sacrifice is the province of the priests. And the prophets are the ones who set about always asking the awkward questions. They are the ones who stand in their own space And of course, Bridget was a prophet. One of the stories I like best about Bridget was the one where, her father had given her away, but then he finally reclaimed her, brought her back. But when she came back into his household, she kept giving all the food away. And he was really getting very pissed off at all the food disappearing. So he decided the best thing to do, he would sell her to the king. And so he put her in the chariot and drove off to the king and knocked on the king's door, leaving Bridget into the chariot, which was a very stupid thing for him to do. But he knocked on the king's door and went in and tried to do the deal. And meanwhile, a leper came along, and what did Bridget do? She gave him her father's sword. And when the king and the father came out, and they all thought this was a done deal, and they said, where's the sword? And she said, well, I gave it away, and if it was anything else here to give him, I would have given it too, because that belongs to God. And so the king turned around to the father and said, now listen, this woman is a very hard person to buy, and an even harder one for you to sell. This woman can neither be bought nor sold. In other words, she was, in the old Irish sense, of a virgin, a woman intact, inviolate, a woman of astute integrity. And so what do prophets do? They ask, what are the scapegoats? Where are the scapegoats? Who are the scapegoats today? There was a time, 50, maybe even less, a few years ago, when the scapegoats were the unmarried women or, whoever they happen to be. Now the scapegoats are the nuns. And it just, where the gods of the old religion become the demons of the next. And that process continues from generation to generation until somebody has the power and the courage to stop it, to ask the questions, who are the scapegoats? Where are our origins? That's another question that we might want to ask. From where did we derive? Where are we going? What counts as knowledge? That's another question that a prophet will ask. What counts as knowledge, and who is doing the counting? Because what counts as knowledge in our society, people like Michel Foucault or Daniel Berrigan used to say, if you want to know something about any society, go into the prisons, because that's where the truth lies. That's where one of the most vital truth lies. So that would be, again, just a few headings in relation to the question of sacrifice, and in relation to the question of mercy. And just to say that one of the reasons why we have been recuperating the traditions of Bridget for many, many years, we started back in about 30 years ago, is precisely to recuperate an indigenous tradition of divinity here in Ireland and abroad. And what is really very striking about it, when I've been privileged to offer festivals of Bridget in Canada for 7 years in a row, and the people there, resonate with the images of the cloak, the images of the kris, which are the belt or the girdle, the images of the snowdrops, almost as though they are resonating with cellular memories. It's uncanny. I've learned a great deal from simply watching their reactions and knowing that the language of ritual that we're bringing and that we're uncovering and that we're discovering, because for me it's been a long process of discovery, is related to cellular memory. And cellular memory, of course, is going back to the question of origins. Where do the most authentic rituals lie, and where do the most authentic images lie? And one of the places that they do lie is in the DNA of our bodies. In other words, there are certain symbols that resonate with the DNA, and that's, for instance, one of the reasons why the serpent is so important, because the serpent represents the DNA in many different images, which I don't have to hand right at the moment. But that's what we need to get back to, in the sense that, the cloak is the cloak of mercy, and the cloak covers and offers containment and mercy to all of us. And I'll just finally finish with a brief excavation into the work of a woman called Sarah Ruddick, who's now dead, but she wrote a book called Maternal Thinking, which is a hugely important book, because her point was that we would never do in the private world what we do in the public world. In other words, a mother or a father would not sit around a table and say, well, you three kids on that side, you can have, 4/5 of the food, and whatever's left over, you kids on the other side can have it. And she said, we really have to find a way of integrating the ethics of the private world, or the world of the family, or the world of nurture and wholeness, with the ethics of the public world, because at the moment there's a massive disjuncture. And so I would say maternal thinking is the work of mercy. And thank you.
Mm.